Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Toronto Hyperledger Meetup Group April's event. My name is Laszlo Sándor, and I will be your host tonight. I'm also one of the co-organizers of the team. Today we have a new format. Last month we were offered a Zoom channel by General Assembly, and today we are using a virtual event platform which was offered by Abizond. Abizond is a boutique IT service company, and for full disclosure, I'm the owner and CEO of the company. I'm really excited to offer this tool for the community. Tonight's topic is opportunities to connect Canadian startups with American businesses. And before we dive into this event, I like to do some housekeeping and share some information. In the chat window below, you can type in your questions, and at the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A where those questions will be answered by our presenters. The next thing is an update from the community. First of all, about our Meetup group. We are working on 2 upcoming topic and presentations based on your feedback in the survey we did a few months ago. The next presentation will be about Sawtooth, because that was one of the topic we found you as a member interested in. And also we are working to invite presenters on Hyperledger Indie, which is also a very hot topic today. On a global community level, since the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, there has been multiple initiatives, and one of them is to organize more and more virtual events across the globe in multiple different time zones. So if you follow us on our Hyperledger Toronto Meetup group page and channel, then we will cross-post these events, and you can feel free to join any of those who you may like. Having that said, let's begin. And I'd like to start with introducing our 2 presenters today. The first guest and presenter is Todd Barrett, a trade commissioner at the Global Affairs Canada, Canada's federal ministry responsible for foreign affairs, international trade, and international development assistance. Our second presenter, Rob Fiddick, is also a trade commissioner. He's working at the Consulate General of Seattle in Canada. He assists technology companies from across Canada to identify cross-border commercial opportunities in the Pacific Northwest region. Having that said, I'd like to give it over to Todd, and please take it away.
For Canadian companies to subsidize their cost of international business travel, let's say. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in my presentation. We can also, in our office in Toronto, give you resources that you might find useful in terms of what steps you need to take, things you should think about before you take that leap abroad. We also work with a lot of the other partners in the business and tech community around, well, in our case, in Ontario and Toronto. So we work closely with, the Mars and the Communitech and whatnot, and these types of organizations, because a lot of the companies that are located there are our clients too. But in some cases, you might not even be aware as a Canadian company that there's a service available by one of these organizations. The Toronto Regional Board of Trade, for example, offers a week-long accelerator program for companies that want to do business abroad. So sometimes if companies that come to us aren't quite ready to be connected with our colleagues abroad, we'll refer you and to other partners locally, and maybe even give you some additional information that can be helpful for you. These next 3 services, I'll just read them: market potential, qualified contacts, resolving problems. This is what you'll get when you talk to one of our colleagues who's located internationally. Market potential assessment is basically them giving you the lay of the land and in whatever area it is that you're looking to whatever sector it is that you're looking to do business in their market. So when I was in Brazil, we had a lot of companies approach us about opportunities in fintech. They wanted to know what the landscape was like in Brazil. So we'd say, okay, well, in Brazil, there's similarities to Canada. These are the things you should know. These are the things that are different. These are things you got to do before you think about coming to Brazil. I mean, some basics. You got to know that they speak Portuguese and not Spanish. Some people don't, realize that because they're located around Spanish countries. The next service that's listed here the next service on the same slide, qualified contacts. That's basically us using our network to put you as a company in touch with potential customer, potential partner, maybe an investor. Again, I'll use my own experience. In Brazil, we had companies who wanted to talk to some of the banks there. So we had to develop our own network. So that way, when you came to us and said, I want to talk to Bradesco Bank, we would have a contact there that we could put you in touch with, make a soft introduction, that type of thing. The last service is resolving problems. That can be a lot of things, and especially in times like COVID-19, there's a lot of problems that come up that didn't exist before. Whether it's if you were shipping something abroad, getting your things out of whatever country they were located in and back to Canada, or things that have come up where force majeure in contracts where contracts have basically been declared invalid because of inability to deliver because of international pandemic. This isn't something that's common, obviously, but these are the types of things that could come up. Next slide, please. So I mentioned before we have funding programs. These are meant to support Canadian companies to go abroad and try and find international opportunities. I'm really just going to talk. You'll see there's 4 listed here. I'm going to talk really just about the first 2. So can export SME, small medium enterprise, and then can export innovation. The other 2 I won't mention because they're not applicable to individual companies. They're more for associations and community organizations. So call them regional development agencies, this type of thing. So go to the next slide. So Can Export SME is of the funding programs that our ministry and the Trade Commissioner Service is responsible for administering. This is definitely, it's our most popular, it's the most widely used. What this program will do is reimburse companies up to 75% of eligible expenses, up to a maximum of $75,000 to do international business activities. So I'll give a concrete example. Hopefully it makes sense. You want to go to a trade show in, let's say, London, and you submit a Can Export application that says, I'd like to travel to this trade show because it's important for these reasons, and we're looking to do business, let's say, in the UK. You give a little bit of a business case, and if your application's approved, you can be reimbursed for up to 75% of the expenses that were incurred to go to that trade show. And that would, under normal circumstances, include travel for obvious reasons. Right now, the travel part specifically is on hold. But in a normal times, you would be reimbursed for up to 75% of the cost of your flight. There's a daily per diem of $400. There's 75% reimbursement for the cost to go to the trade show or the conference, whatever it is. Even if your company wanted to have a booth at one of these conferences, which can be a pretty big expense, you can be reimbursed for up to 75% of that. And since at the moment, there's restrictions on travel globally, and a lot of conferences have, if not being canceled, maybe some become virtual. People are obviously not traveling. So there's other things that you can also get reimbursed for if under this program. That can include, as you see here, adaptation of your marketing tools. If you want, let's say, an expense that you incur because you got to translate your marketing materials into a different language. I had a company recently who is looking to hire consultant to give them regular information on regulatory issues to go into the Nordic markets, and so they can get reimbursed for up to a certain amount for the cost of hiring a consultant to give information on regulatory, legal, tax matters, etc. Another one which has come up quite a bit recently, especially with tech companies, is you can get reimbursed for your intellectual property protection in terms of registering your intellectual property in other jurisdictions. So that's another thing that more and more so we're seeing companies use when they're looking to, when they submit their CAN export applications. I'll go to the next slide. CAN export innovation is very similar to CAN export SME, except the main purpose of this particular program is so that you as a company can develop international R&D or innovation collaborations. You get reimbursed for the same types of expenses. So you can get reimbursed for your travel if you're going to go travel internationally. You can see here meeting costs, translation services, etc. But under this particular program, as opposed to the last one I spoke about, your travel abroad and your expenses incurred in terms of doing international business are to develop these R&D partnerships. So let's just say there's this can even be academics in some cases, not even companies. So there's an academic in, let's say, University of Toronto who is looking to develop a partnership with somebody in Germany. They can use this program for some of the travel back and forth to facilitate those kinds of partnerships. I would say that the application process for this is a little bit longer. It's a little bit more rigorous than the last one, but it's also something that a lot of companies and even, like I said, academics will tend to use. One thing I should have mentioned for even on the CAN Export SME and this one as well, the wait time for an application to be processed could take up to usually 5 or 6 weeks. It's coming down. It used to be lower than that. It went up because the demand for the program went up, and now they've got that under control a bit. So what you would do if you were going to use one of these programs, you submit an application, let's say today, and then it would be for travel that you might do in 6 months from now or even less than that. But to be safe, let's say you're going to go somewhere in the fall, you submit an application for expenses, you get it approved, and then you have that already, by the time you actually have to do the travel, because you don't want companies being uncertain about whether or not they'll get approved. So go on to the next, please. This is the last thing I'll talk about in my part of the presentation before I pass it over to Rob. We do have another program. This isn't a financial reimbursement like the last ones I spoke about. Rather, this is we call it the Canadian Technology Accelerator. It might not be an accelerator in the most traditional sense that most of you might be thinking of, but basically what this program offers to companies that apply and are accepted is call it like a white glove service, if you will, in the markets that these accelerators are located in. So I just from experience, I know that some people think of the Canadian Technology Accelerators, don't realize that it's actually part of the Trade Commissioner Service, because it's, I think we've had a couple thousand companies go through it over the last 4 or 5 years. And so, a lot of people are aware of the CTA and don't realize it's linked to the Trade Commissioner Service. But we have these now in I think there's 9 cities around the world. This includes some in the US, New York, Boston, Palo Alto, San Francisco. We have ones in Taiwan now, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and soon to be in India and Germany. So it's for companies that are really looking to invest and grow in the markets, the cities that I mentioned. So you apply to this program. If you get accepted, you can expect a very hands-on, tailored type of program for you in these different countries. So this could be, very connections with investors. If you're going to New York, we have we have a network there of people in the financial sector who are willing to talk to our companies who are looking to move into those markets. Sometimes these are just Canadians who might live abroad and have been successful in whatever country it is they're located in, and they're willing to give back and try and help Canadian companies who are just starting in those markets to be able to be successful. So I'll stop there. I think we'll have time for Q&A after my colleague Rob talks a bit. So that's it for now, and hopefully you enjoyed the presentation there, and happy to answer questions at the end.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Todd. So our next presenter is Rob Fiddick. He is working at the Consulate General of Canada in Seattle, and he assists technology companies from across Canada to identify cross-border commercial opportunities in the Pacific Northwest. Rob, please take it away.
Companies, our partners here in the region, are quite open to meeting and working with Canadian partners. But right now, we've had to take a bit more of a diplomatic approach to it. So, as an example, I'm working with a Canadian client that wants to get connected with Nordstrom, which is a major, luxury retailer here. It's really not the best time to sort of reaching out to them to try to sell, to become a vendor. If you have a particular solution related to, an e-commerce solution or something that they actually might need at the moment, that's one thing. But if you're looking just to get in their, vendor ecosystem, it's a little bit more difficult. So again, it's kind of a case by case nature, but we're just sort of adapting to how the situation is. Hopefully things do start opening up soon, and there is some plans in the region to open up in partnership with other states and provinces along the West Coast to sort of coordinate the reopening of the economy. So we'll sort of keep our eyes and ears open for that. But that should be coming soon, and hopefully that means we can kind of ramp up the kind of services we deliver to Canadian clients. So I'm going to keep my presentation fairly simple. In fact, we'll stay on this slide for the first half of it. But first, I just want to give a bit of an introduction to what our consulate is. As Todd mentioned, we're part of a global network of 120 plus consulates and embassies. I'm in the U.S. Pacific Northwest in Seattle. Our remit, our territory covers Washington State, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska. And when we talk about tech, that really just means 90% of the inquiries we get from Canadian companies, it's for Washington State and Oregon. We don't do as much work in Alaska and Idaho, but there are 12 plus other consulates actually across the U.S. as well. So it's of course, the U.S. is the largest trading partner for Canadian companies. So it makes sense that we have a large number of consulates here. Our priority sectors in the Northwest here are ICT or high technology. We don't actually have the luxury of splitting that up into subsectors. So Todd mentioned sometimes we do split things up where we have a fintech trade commissioner or digital technologies trade commissioner, depending on what the resources are for a particular consulate. In the Seattle consulate, it's just me for everything tech. So we can be spread a little bit thin, but I try to be sort of a generalist and have a knowledge of most of the sectors, but I'm certainly not a subject matter expert in any one sector. So in terms of blockchain, I will say that off the top, I'm not an expert in this on blockchain technology, but I do have a fairly conversant in it and understand the benefits and the role it has in the Northwest. The other sectors here, though, aerospace, advanced manufacturing, life sciences, clean tech, those are the priority areas here, and they kind of reflect just the types of companies we have in the region. So that kind of segues into the second point that I want to talk about, which is just what exactly is the ICT sector overview here in the Northwest. I think it does surprise a lot of Canadian companies when we actually talk about how significant the ICT sector is here in the Northwest. In Washington State alone, there's around 14,000 technology firms. That doesn't actually even include companies like Starbucks, which could realistically be considered a technology firm, given the payments platform and technology services they provide. But there's a significant number of technology firms here. Employs around 250,000 to 300,000 people in the state. We have obviously, the two largest companies by market cap in our back door here with Microsoft and Amazon. But there's also just sort of a veritable who's who of other major companies in the region. Online real estate companies like Zillow and Redfin are here. We have Expedia, major telecommunications companies. We have T-Mobile. We have F5, Cray. the list really does go on in terms of recognizable companies. And then, of course, all the other companies in the region are major buyers and investors in ICT technologies. So, Boeing, whether it's Boeing or some of the larger life sciences companies, Costco, Nordstrom, as I mentioned earlier on, other retail companies like REI and Eddie Bauer. There's a lot of companies that are headquartered here, and I think just a lot of people don't necessarily notice that they actually are based here. So Seattle is a bit of an under the radar region as far as markets that companies are interested in. And I think that is particularly salient for Canadian clients that are East Coast based. I would say that 90% of the companies we work with are probably Alberta or BC based, and this was just a geographic proximity that they want to, their natural first toehold in the U.S. Is to come to Washington State. But certainly we'd like to sort of strengthen our visibility with companies on the East Coast or sort of Eastern Canada. Although I will get into this later, but interestingly, we had 5 companies in the Blockchain Market Accelerator here, and funnily enough, 4 of them are actually from Toronto. So Toronto is definitely well represented for that. But I'll get into that in a little bit. A little bit also just on the blockchain ecosystem overview here. The Northwest, Pacific Northwest here, we're not necessarily known as the hub for blockchain technology. I think places like Palo Alto or Silicon Valley more broadly, New York, maybe maybe Boston. Some of the other regions have sort of jumped out a little bit ahead of Seattle. And I think that it's areas where there's a natural affinity for fintech. Fintech's not traditionally been a strength of the Northwest market here as far as the tech sector. But that's changing. It certainly is growing, and we do have what could be considered the strongest B2B sort of and cloud ecosystem, even compared to some of the other major tech hubs here. So it's sort of natural that it will be growing and growing quickly. We do have a number of local blockchain investor groups that are popping up with significant funds they're putting towards blockchain technology, and those funds are open to Canadian companies, which is very important. And of course, we have major partners like Microsoft, Amazon that are investing, have T-Mobile and others that are investing heavily in the sector. And then we even also have other groups like the Pacific Northwest National Labs, which is part of the U.S. National Labs network. And they're based here in rural part of Washington State, but they're doing a lot of work right now on blockchain as well, and we're partnering with them to identify opportunities for Canadian companies. Although my contact there does complain that whenever he meets with me, he has to declare it in some paperwork that gets sent to the State Department. Whenever he meets with a Canadian, I really threw him for a loop when I mentioned him. I was also British, so he decided he did not include that. Remember that, you just forget that. But they do like to work with us, and there's a lot of organizations here looking at a lot more cross-border partnerships. The 2 that I've noted there, the Cascadia Innovation Corridor initiative, is a 3-party initiative between Oregon, Washington State, and British Columbia to sort of strengthen the innovation ecosystem and make sure really what we're trying to do is thin the border. The joke is that Vancouver and Seattle are only 200 miles apart, but it can feel like 2,000 miles apart. So we're doing what we can to sort of make it easier for companies and organizations to collaborate across the border, easier for goods and services to get across the border, and make it really more of one cohesive region. The other example there is the Cascadia Blockchain Council. This is actually a spin out of the Washington Technology Industry Association, which is the local state tech association here. They're really trying to make the Northwest here, and they include parts of Canada in that as well, but they're really trying to make it a hub for blockchain technology. So they're working on a lot of the legislative and policy changes in the Northwest to make it easier for blockchain companies to be established here, and also identifying opportunities to partner with Canadian organizations. And they were actually one of the organizations that we partnered with for our Blockchain Market Accelerator. So for the next one, actually, will be we'll jump into the Canadian Blockchain Market Accelerator. For this, we can go to the next slide. So as Laszlo mentioned before, and actually, sorry, I'll jump back to what Todd had mentioned. this effectively is what we consider a Canadian Technology Accelerator. This is not officially, as far as the TCS is concerned, a Canadian Technology Accelerator. It's a bit of an off-the-books program that I stood up. So it basically, that meant I just didn't go through Ottawa to get approval on the various requirements on that. So I just sort of went ahead with it. But it's very similar to what Todd had mentioned. Our CTAs do vary in terms of how they're structured, but ours is, it basically, what it amounts to is a white glove service for what we normally do with Canadian clients. So the four core services that Todd had mentioned earlier, identifying qualified contacts is something we do for all Canadian companies, or 90% of the companies that come through our region. And for this one, we just extended how long we're working with these companies. So of the the 5 companies that are in the program, I've been working with them since, the beginning of the year, on an ongoing basis. So instead of doing a handful of introductions, letting the company run with it, and then come back and meet with them later and see how they're doing, we've been working more hands-on for the first Q1 of 2020. But basically, this program, it's an 8-week program. Originally when I talked to Laszlo, we thought this program would be over by now. So you have it listed here as a program that runs through January through March. It's actually still ongoing because of the COVID-19 outbreak. We basically had all these companies planning to come and land here in late March. And then, of course, the outbreak happened here in sort of the beginning of March in Seattle. So we had to put those plans on hold. Fortunately, it's actually probably benefited the companies that are in our program, because we've allowed them to just stretch out the program, and our local partners have been okay with that. So instead of being it's still a 1.5 week in-person program, but the remote base is now basically a 4-month remote based program instead of a 6.5 weeks. So it's actually sort of turned out to the benefit of the Canadian companies. And what we really based the program around was one, mentorship, and then also identifying qualified investor and business development contacts. So each of the companies that are in the program were paired up with a local blockchain subject matter expert, someone who knows the ecosystem really well and can provide guidance on how they can tailor their product market fit, their go-to-market strategy, whatever their needs were. That's what we based it off of. So a few of the companies wanted help with investors, a few of them wanted help with marketing. Some of them wanted, actually, I think all of them wanted enterprise sales training. So, we just sort of tailored the mentorship and the programming based off of what they need. So that's the great thing with the program. I think we go to the next slide. Who's it for? Again, we targeted early stage companies. In some markets for the TCS, it can be hard for early stage companies to get traction. The Northwest here, we might be a bit of an outlier. I'm actually quite happy to work with some very, very early stage startups. I think the Seattle market's a fairly friendly market for Canadian companies. So I think we're a great place for companies that actually they're quite early on and need a little more help finding their footing. It's actually a great place to go. We had a mixture of revenue generating and pre-revenue companies, so there wasn't really any issue with who could join. And in the end, we actually didn't do 6 companies because one of them wasn't able to join. We had a few dozen apply, and we selected the top 5. So it's again a small program. It allows us to sort of provide a boutique service and really not get stretched too thin as far as bringing these companies through the program. I'd also note that Todd mentioned earlier some of the Can Export funding, and this is actually, we again partnered with them. We actually helped the companies apply for the funding. So in our case, we actually applied for Can Export Innovation funding for all of the companies that were joining the program because they were going to be meeting with a number of different investors in the region. So the final week that they were going to spend in Seattle, which was supposed to be end of March, but will probably be early fall. We'd set up meetings with Microsoft M12 and various blockchain investment groups around here. So we were able to sort of secure funding for them, and actually the great thing is we can just defer that until the next program. But it was a really fantastic service for the Canadian companies, because on top of our program being free to begin with, we were also able to offset the majority of their costs of actually getting into Seattle. So they ended up with this great 4-month-long sort of digital and in-person program for a very low cost. Next slide. So again, I mentioned some of this earlier, but the main benefit was we basically worked with each one of the companies. We identified a hit list of companies, of local partners they wanted to meet with. So that could be just depending on what they were looking at. A lot of them were looking at, the banking sector. Others were looking at, enterprise, e-commerce. We were able to work with our local partners, which included the Cascadia Blockchain Council and the Washington Technology Industry Association, to help identify the right people they need to meet with. We also had the mentorships, which was great. We did 2 days of training at the very beginning of the program here in Seattle, which again focused on sales, how to refine their sales pitch, how to sell to enterprise partners, meeting with local organizations that can help them with those things. We've also set up a number of meetings with investors, which are on hold, but a few of them have already gone through. And then, also, of course, a number of different briefings with the Trade Commissioner Service. And the great thing that working with us is that, we're leaning on our local partners, but then we also can lean on my colleague who works in the aerospace sector, or my colleague that works in the life sciences, clean tech sector, and we can really make sure that no matter who they're looking to sell to, we have them covered. All right, next slide. Okay, so that was the end of that one. I did just say that was actually the end of Todd's presentation, where I snuck in some slides on his presentation. I did have some sort of future opportunities, and I just wanted to mention these. This is sort of one of the main roles that we have, being the in-market trade commissioner based here in the U.S., is identifying opportunities as they come up and helping promote those to Canadian clients. So just as an example, last night, working with some of the local partners here, we found out about an opportunity from Pacific Northwest National Labs, which is actually looking to partner with, or interested in potentially partnering with Canadian companies on a blockchain solution for tracking high value medical supplies and/or basically supplies that need to be highly secured as they move around. We also found out about an opportunity for an immunity passport program that a local company is working on for health tech workers. And they want to help use blockchain solutions for helping medical service workers who need to have credentials approved for different access or where they can be and things like that. So when we work with Canadian clients, it tends to be what I sort of consider a push and a pull situation. Sometimes we have Canadian companies that reach out to us and say, would really like to sell to company X, Y, and Z, or we'd like to learn more about your region, and we do that. And then other times we just find out about interesting potential sales opportunities, and we push those out through our network. So I'll reach out to my colleagues like Todd and basically say, do you know of any interesting companies that might want to apply for something like this? So we try to sort of come up with as many interesting opportunities for Canadian companies in the region. As far as the Blockchain Market Accelerator, we are hoping to do a version of it for next fiscal year. We've sort of been a little bit pushed off in terms of our timelines because of COVID-19. But we actually had the WTIA reach out to us again and say they actually want to do a decentralized identity accelerator program as well. So there's sort of multiple irons in the fire. We're not sure if we're going to take a specific or a little bit of a turn on what the market accelerator is going to be for next year. But we're certainly we'll be working with our colleagues across Canada to sort of see what maybe the momentum is, and see if we want to focus it on or tailor it a little bit more than just have an overall blockchain. But we'll see where it goes. But again, we're really excited to be here. I'm always interested to learn more about what's going on in Canada as far as blockchain. I would say that was probably the biggest challenge with getting this market accelerator up and running, was getting a handle on what the ecosystem is in Canada and who are our local partners to work with. So this is a great opportunity to get the word out on our programs. Mm-hmm. I think with that, I'll pass it back over to Laszlo.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you for this valuable information. Give you a couple of questions to both of you, if you can cover. First, to Todd, you are working more on the generic business side. Obviously, prior to the COVID pandemic, what was the trend in terms of technology companies? Who had more success over others in the States or anywhere else in abroad?
Well, first of all, I guess you answered part of the question by saying in the States, but I would say that first and foremost, companies that we work with venture to the U.S. before they go anywhere else. That's not always the case, but that's often the case. If it's not the US, it's often an English-speaking market. So UK, Australia, etc. And in terms of the companies that are the most successful, I don't want to contradict a little bit what Rob said, but often, he says he works with some companies who are very early stage, maybe trying to get their footing still. But often, in my experience here, the companies that have been most successful are the ones that already have that maybe 1-2 key clients in Canada, or even a key client abroad. Because when I go to talk to Rob or to one of my colleagues and say, hey, there's this awesome company here, they're looking for your help to do business in your region. If I can't give them an example of who they're already selling to, who's one of their clients, it's going to be hard for Rob or my other colleagues abroad to be able to pitch this company to their local network. So you want to, before you come and work with us, I would say we tell companies, unless you have, the next big thing that, your quantum computing companies and 15 guys with PhDs in quantum physics who are going to change the way computing is, it's hard for us to find that, proof of concept, that client for you. So, US for sure. There's a lot of companies who have these open innovation programs where they're looking actively to work with, to invest in startups. So there's lots of opportunities for that out there. If companies are, what I'll say, ready to do it, because that's another thing is, it's, don't take for granted how difficult it is to go and do business abroad. That sounds obvious, but companies who have the financial means to do it, sometimes hiring a local person, in the US or wherever, making sure, the lay of the land before you go there.
Yeah.
And what do you see from your experience as a lead time for companies starting a conversation with US companies and to actually establishing a business or opening an office there?
Yeah, the lead time can be quite long. Business does move a little bit faster here, but as far as the successes of the companies that I've worked with, sometimes it's, it can be a year later that you actually finally hear back that something's actually happened. I will quickly just jump back to your early question though, and I should clarify. I agree with Todd as far as when I meant that I work with smaller companies is often we'll provide almost like a soft assistance with some of the smaller companies because they want to get to know what the market is, and so we're here to help them, I should say. So we're always here to help some of the smaller companies. The ones that do have the success here, though, are the ones that can identify they have some success in Canada, some traction. And actually, I would completely echo what Todd mentioned, that when you have someone based here, those are the companies that really succeed. So there's a handful of companies that I've worked with over the past few years where they've actually just set a business development sales rep here in Seattle. They're the ones that actually see some faster moving traction. If you're not here, it takes a lot longer. As much as we're doing this on a webinar, and we're obviously all in a new environment of having to do everything remotely. We'll see how things go back once it's all said and done. But there isn't really a replacement, or there wasn't really a replacement for face to face. So if you're not going to be permanently in the market, you need to be here a lot. And again, that's also why it is more difficult for some of our counterpart, our Canadian clients in Eastern Canada. It's a lot more difficult to get here. So that's why we tend to work with a lot of companies from Vancouver, because it's a 2-hour drive. So.
And how do you see the COVID-19 will have effect on applying for this blockchain tech accelerator program?
I think we can do the majority of it online. Actually, I think it's better, and that's why we actually set it up as a hybrid online, virtual as well as in-person program. It's not really possible and practical to ask a Canadian client to come out and spend 8 straight weeks in market unless they are actually committing to it and they actually want to open up an office. So I think we'll be able to keep moving forward. We're going to see some interesting movement. I think the Cascadia Innovation Corridor program, they're actually working on a bilateral blockchain program. And what they want to, at least the focus of this program so far, and it hasn't really gained a lot of traction yet because it's early days, but they want to focus on blockchain and food security. I think just given the fact that Washington State is a massive agricultural producer and there is that local blockchain expertise, that's something that's going to completely change following COVID-19. So I think you might see some, depending on where it is. So it's blockchain applications for different sectors are going to grow. So whether e-commerce expands and now you have more focus on blockchain e-commerce rather than blockchain and brick and mortar. So I think you'll see some of those changes. But as far as our program, I think we can keep doing it.
One more blockchain related question that earlier when we had a conversation, you mentioned that companies are more focused on non-crypto based blockchain companies. Can you give a little bit of insight to that? What's the opinion of the industry about enterprise grade, permission based, or not crypto versus crypto based project? Why they are turning away, let's say, or less welcome? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and that was primarily, we did have some interesting Canadian companies that applied that were more on the crypto side. I think it was just a matter of we needed to have a little bit of cohesion around who we had down here. Just understanding that blockchain is a horizontal technology. It's not, so we didn't want to get too wide so that when we actually tried to do larger events, we wouldn't be able to attract the right kind of crowd. So in part of that was just a practical sense that, if we're going to meet with some of the larger players in the region and we can't arrange individual one-on-one meetings, if we're going to meet with some folks over at Microsoft, we might be able to get a program set up with them, but we wanted to have our group be somewhat cohesive in the solutions they're providing. So that's why we kind of focused on the enterprise B2B applications of blockchain. Otherwise, you might end up in a situation where, the people in the room are really only interested in 2 out of the 5 presentations or something like that. So that isn't to say though there isn't interest regionally. I think we would actually want to focus saying, okay, next time let's do a crypto focused blockchain accelerator. So it's really that really is just a logistics kind of issue.
I see.
Yeah.
All right. Back to you, Todd. Maybe something you already covered partially, but like to ask this again, or just ask this, that in terms of technology companies, is there any trend which tend to be more successful, let's say in the English-speaking countries than others?
So are there more trends in non-English speaking countries?
No, in English-speaking countries, is there any trend among technology companies?
Well, the majority of companies that we work with and that my team has worked with, it's often like B2B. And that's as opposed to B2C and other types of companies. But I think for the most part, it's our network abroad is often with the Microsofts of the UK, of Australia, and so on, because they're often the ones who have the pockets deep enough to be able to set up a pilot and eventually make it worthwhile for our clients, our companies, to spend time engaging Microsoft or whoever it might be. So that's what we've worked with a lot. I mean, I could go into a bit of a sort of subsectors. We've had in terms of ICT. Fintech companies, for the most part, I would say they focus on the US. If they're going to go outside of Canada, it's like rare that when I was in Brazil, for example, I would never see, I didn't see too many Canadian fintech companies there. I think because fintech, there's a lot of regulatory issues involved, and so people are more familiar with the US regulatory system than say, China or wherever else it might be. We've worked with a lot of health tech companies, and I don't mean just health in terms of you have like a pharmaceutical product, but like health, like ICT companies. We've seen a lot of companies come through our office who have been successful, who might let's say have a platform for drug development, that type of thing. So they're actually a software company, but they're selling into pharmaceutical companies, that type of thing.
Mhm.
So those are a couple that come to mind off the top of my head. But yeah, I don't know, Rob, you had any other?
No, I was gonna say, like, health tech's definitely a growing sector here, and actually that's one solution. And perhaps we can share some of this information with Laszlo afterwards for some links and different portals that for places where Canadian companies can apply. But right now there's a call out from Washington State for technology solutions for COVID-19 response and recovery. And so we're working with our local partners here. Right now, there's a bit of a gray area because we're not sure if international companies are allowed to apply for it. But we're finding a back channel way of getting it done. But companies that have interesting solutions for COVID-19 recovery. So whether that's a health tech related or e-commerce, or it can really kind of run the gamut in terms of what it is. But that's something we can share with the group. But yeah, no, I think it's interesting locally. One of the challenges we actually have as far as helping Canadian companies is knowing who they can sell into. And actually, I think, again, going back to kind of what Todd had mentioned earlier with Canadian companies that are well prepared, they know what their market is, they know who they can sell to, they have a track record. It helps because we do often get companies that come in and they say, "Oh, we'd love to, sell to some into your market," and you say, "Who do you, what's your sector?" And they say, "Well, we can sell into every sector," and that's almost like an impossible request because there's just too many. So it actually is much more helpful if they can kind of narrow it down, and then we can actually really really focus and we can find the right local partners. I mean, at the end of the day, I kind of consider myself a cross-border connector. It's my job to know some interesting people here that I can put you in contact with. So. Often if Todd sends somebody over to me and they say, "Oh, we want to get connected with X, Y, and Z," and we say, "Well, here's some people we think you should know," start some conversations and see where it goes from there.
Before the pandemic, the cannabis industry was a hot industry to get into or do business in. Have you seen, Rob, any blockchain company that used the blockchain? Any cannabis company using blockchain technology and coming over US?
I personally haven't seen them. I know there's been some interest. I will have to. I can't answer that probably completely right now. Our cannabis companies are being routed through someone else in our office because there's some sort of political sensitivities around it. But I have seen some blockchain cannabis companies actually from the US, interestingly, set up shop in Canada. And that's the other sort of role we have here is identifying interesting companies that want to open up an office in Canada. So there's definitely some companies involved in that. I think we've stayed a little bit away from that at the moment because it's a bit of a challenging situation to work with companies that are in that space. I mean, granted, it's legal here. It's legal in Canada. It's legal in Washington State, but there's a federal border between us, and it's not legal there. So.
Right.
I don't know if Todd, maybe you've had to counsel some more companies just generally coming into the U.S.
Sorry, I don't have much to add. I haven't worked with. That was never an area that I covered. I know there's people in our office who previously did, but yeah, that's right. Personally.
All right. So closer to the hour, I just want to have a final question to both of you. That what do you think the changes will occur after the pandemic goes away? Like, where will be the focus for both of you?
I can start by I could tell you where the Trade Commissioner Service has recently decided it's going to put more resources, and there's a couple things that come to mind. One is a big focus on IP and us educating companies about protecting their IP before they start doing business abroad. You've probably heard stories, but there's companies that, let's say, a small Canadian startup has some great technology. They start talking to a major company from Europe, the US, China, wherever. Before you know it, they've been having these deep, intense conversations, and then, well, maybe that foreign company all of a sudden has a product that looks like what that Canadian company was doing, and there's not much you can do about that if you haven't protected your IP. And not only that, I can think, I remember being in a presentation recently with an extremely well-known, tech entrepreneur in Canada, and he said, "You just protect your IP, and you're going to increase your valuation." Like that in itself is something that makes your company that much more valuable as well. So we're trying to. It's something that's fairly even new to us in terms of educating our own people about this, to be able to have them talk to companies confidently and knowledgeably about your IP. But I would just say that's something that we see more and more of, especially with these large companies who they're going around buying up startups and whatnot. And the first thing they do is if they haven't already, they protect the IP, and they might just put it to the side for now. So I think that's just one thing that comes to mind.
Right.
That's a trend we're seeing.
One thing we're keeping our eyes on here in the U.S. Pacific Northwest is actually the investor ecosystem. It's a fairly robust ecosystem here. I'm obviously not compared to others, but it's a fairly strong sort of angel Series A level environment. Not much above that. A lot of actually local companies, even though it's again a very large sector here, most of them have to go out of state to sort of get larger rounds done. But we're keeping our eyes on how this is going to impact liquidity for those funds, and whether they're going to be as interested in Canadian companies. We had started to kind of finally make some traction with a lot of the local investors and getting them opened up in Canada. Two of them actually just opened up offices, or not offices, but one opened up an office recently in Vancouver to create more deal flow for Canadian companies, and the other one partnered in a fund that's going to be directed towards Canadian investments. But I guess how this COVID-19 outbreak is going to impact the tech sector more broadly, and the number of companies, number of startups that are going to fail, the number of them that are going to have to cut down staff, whether or not they need to reassess their runway and see if they actually have enough of a runway to sort of emerge from this pandemic and still be in one piece. There's a strong chance that a lot of these local funds are going to be more focused on their existing portfolios rather than looking at new prospective companies. So I think that's going to be a challenge. And I'm only sort of mentioning that one just because that's something we do a lot for Canadian clients in our region. There's a lot of companies that come here and they say, we'd love to sort of sell to the region, do that, but we're actually also interested in a potential raise in the next 6 months or a year. So we kind of do both services for them, connecting them with investors and buyers. So that's going to be an interesting change with the Canadian dollar dropping. I don't know how that will impact it, because it does make the valuation a little bit more easy to swallow. But again, if investors just start looking inward towards their existing portfolio, we could see a lot less deal flows going into Canada.
Thank you. Having that said, I'd like to thank you to both of you to come on board and dedicate your time to the community and sharing your thought and what you do and what do you do for Canadian businesses in general, and also specifically about the program you are running in Seattle. One more reminder to the community that we are going, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, that we are going to cross-post other events as well. Please follow us on our meetup.com channel as usual, and we will announce our next meetup in May, sometimes later. So, Rob, Todd, thank you once again, and wish you all the best. Stay safe and healthy, and talk to you soon.
Likewise. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.